The dust hung in the air like something alive, thick, gritty, clinging to the back of the throat. It carried the sharp stink of sweat and panic. Then came the sound, hooves pounding closer, thousands of them, a relentless drum that made the ground tremble underfoot. Screams followed. High, sharp, tearing through the haze, rising from the heart of the city where the gates had just given way. In narrow alleys, women grabbed at one another, silk sleeves ripping as they ran, eyes wild, breath ragged. There was nowhere left to go. Arrows hissed overhead, striking flesh with merciless accuracy. Blood soaked into the dirt, turning ancient streets slick and dark. One by one, the proud towers of Samarkand fell quiet. Their banners were crushed beneath iron-shod boots. But the worst had not yet begun. That waited in the hands of the victors, men who no longer saw people, only prizes. As the sun slid lower and shadows stretched across the carnage, a whisper passed among those still breathing. The Horde had come not merely to conquer, but to erase. What you're about to hear involves massacre, enslavement, and the deliberate targeting of women in ways that still echo through history. These events come from chronicles written by witnesses and survivors, and they are deeply unsettling. Our focus here is not to glorify suffering, but to expose the machinery behind it, the strategy, the cold logic, the use of terror as a tool. If this feels too close, step away. No judgment. For those who continue, let's lift the veil. This was not random savagery. It was a calculated storm, engineered to break empires and rebuild them in the image of one man. In the year 1220, the Mongol Horde descended on Samarkand, the glittering jewel of Central Asia, not in blind fury, but as part of a system of conquest that turned fear itself into fuel. The Khwarezmian Empire stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Indus River, wealthy, powerful, and confident. That confidence proved fatal. When Khwarezmian officials slaughtered Mongol envoys, an unforgivable insult in steppe culture, they triggered something far larger than retaliation. What followed was not just war. It was an experiment on a continental scale, where cities like Samarkand became laboratories for tactics that would reshape the world. Why does this matter now? Because it reveals how a single miscalculation can spiral into a machine that devours millions. It shows how terror multiplies obedience, how power relies on dark arithmetic, and how the echoes of such systems still linger in our own fractured age. But to understand the fall, we must begin with the rise. Picture the Mongolian steppe in the late 1100s, a vast ocean of grass beneath an unforgiving sky. Tribes clashed like starving wolves, bound by fragile alliances and endless vendettas. Harsh winds tore through nomad camps where survival meant mastering the horse and bow before childhood had even ended. Into this world was born Temujin, around 1162, near the Onon River. According to legend, he entered the world clutching a blood clot in his fist, an omen, his people said, of destiny. His father, a minor chieftain, was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was only 9 years old. Overnight, his family fell from status into abandonment. They survived by digging roots from frozen ground, by hunting rodents through brutal winters. Former allies turned their backs. Temujin was captured, enslaved, humiliated. He learned early that weakness was an invitation to die. He escaped. Slowly, methodically, he gathered followers, men bound not by blood, but by loyalty and shared survival. He forged alliances through marriage and careful calculation. His wife, Berta, was kidnapped soon after their union, a common raid in that lawless world. Temujin pursued her, rallied warriors, and won her back. It was his first true victory, and a lesson in force. Betrayal, however, was never far. His blood brother became his enemy. When Temujin finally crushed him, he ordered 70 rivals boiled alive in cauldrons, not out of madness, but message. On the steppe, cruelty was communication: unite or be erased. By 1206, Temujin had subdued the warring tribes. At a great assembly beside the Karait River, they proclaimed him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. What followed was revolutionary. He reorganized society as if it were a single army. People were divided into units of tens, hundreds, and thousands. Merit mattered more than lineage. A shepherd could become a general. A noble could be reduced to nothing. Spies moved silently through the ranks, enforcing loyalty. Horses were bred for endurance. Arrows were designed to punch through armor. Conquered enemies were not wasted. They were absorbed, their skills repurposed. This was not chaos. It was innovation. A mobile war machine powered by plunder, discipline, and promise. At its core was a simple rule: submit and live, resist and vanish. Genghis Khan turned his gaze outward. First came the Xixia and Jin dynasties of China. Cities fell. Tribute flowed in silk, iron, engineers, and knowledge. The empire grew richer, sharper, more efficient. But one event ignited something darker. In 1218, Genghis sent a trade caravan into the Khwarezmian Empire. The governor of Otrar seized it, accusing the merchants of espionage, and executed them. Genghis demanded justice. The Shah, Muhammad II, responded by beheading the Mongol envoy and sending the shaved head back. It was a declaration of contempt. Genghis Khan answered with mobilization. More than 100,000 riders assembled. The steppe had birthed a storm, and now it rolled west. That autumn, Genghis split his forces, a move that baffled enemies accustomed to slow, centralized armies. Otrar was besieged first. After months, the traitorous governor was captured. Molten silver was poured into his eyes and ears, a symbolic end. Then the horde fanned outward, striking multiple cities at once, tearing the Shah's defenses apart. Muhammad fled, abandoning his empire, hunted across deserts and mountains until he died alone on a Caspian island. His son, Jalal ad-Din, tried to rally resistance, but the machine had momentum. The Mongol system thrived on speed and deception. Feigned retreats lured enemies into traps. Siege engines, built by captured craftsmen, hurled fire and stone. Psychological warfare magnified the terror. Rumors arrived before the armies did. By early 1220, the road to Samarkand lay open. The city stood as a symbol of Khwarezmian greatness. Towering minarets, bustling bazaars, a crossroads of the world. Moats and walls protected it, along with more than 100,000 defenders. Turks, Persians, mercenaries from across the empire. Life inside continued. Merchants argued over spices. Children played in the shade of madrasas. Among them was Aisha, the daughter of a scholar, barely 20 years old. She had eyes like polished onyx and a mind shaped by poetry and astronomy. She spent her days helping her father, Rahman, in the library, copying ancient texts by lamplight. To her, Samarkand felt eternal, but refugees brought whispers, cities erased, rivers clogged with corpses. The Shah promised reinforcements. None came. Then, one morning, scouts spotted dust clouds on the horizon. The horde had arrived. Genghis Khan encircled the city, his riders closing like a living noose. Catapults thundered day and night. Inside the walls, panic spread. The garrison argued in hushed voices, fight or surrender. Rahman, old and learned, urged submission. "These are not men," he said quietly. "They are a force of nature." On the third day, a sortie charged out and was annihilated in a storm of arrows. By the fifth, despair prevailed. Rahman led a delegation through the gates, bearing gifts and pleas. Genghis Khan accepted, but only on his terms. The terms were simple, and they were merciless. Samarkand would surrender all weapons, all warriors, and all treasures. In exchange, the city would be spared immediate destruction. The gates swung open. The Mongols poured in. They moved with frightening order, not as a mob, but as a system. Streets filled with mounted men shouting commands. Families were dragged from their homes and forced into open squares. Aisha watched from a rooftop as the city she had known dissolved into organized chaos. Men were pulled to one side, women and children to the other. No explanations, no hesitation. This was the moment of judgment. Not steel against steel, but lives weighed for usefulness. The order came quickly. Genghis Khan commanded the complete disarmament of the garrison. Once the soldiers were stripped of weapons, they were marched outside the walls. By the end of the afternoon, nearly 30,000 had been executed, throats cut, bodies stacked. A grim monument to resistance rose beyond the city gates. Civilians fared little better. Artisans, engineers, and scholars were spared, not out of mercy, but value. They were chained and marched east to serve the expanding empire. The rest of the population faced division. Women, especially the young and untouched, were claimed as spoils. Aisha was seized in the crush, torn from her father as his voice disappeared beneath the screams. The Mongols did not act randomly. Quotas were enforced. Each warrior received an allotted share. This was not desire, it was policy. A mechanism to reward loyalty, fracture conquered bloodlines, and annihilate the will to resist. Rahman survived because of his knowledge. He watched, powerless, as his daughter vanished into the sprawl of the Mongol camps. Chroniclers would later argue over numbers, but many accounts suggest thousands of women suffered the same fate. Their lives repurposed inside a system that treated human beings as resources. Samarkand's fall was not about one city. It was a message broadcast across Asia. This is the cost of defiance. And yet, even in the ashes, something endured. Rahman was conscripted as an advisor, his mind put to work for the empire that had destroyed his home. Quietly, he observed. He noted weaknesses the Mongols rarely considered: their dependence on pasture for horses, the immense distances stretching supply lines thin. He wrote everything down, hiding his scrolls among looted manuscripts. It was a small act, but it mattered. Knowledge became resistance. The machine rolled on regardless. Aisha's story, reconstructed from scattered survivor accounts, did not return to Samarkand. She was taken east, forced into life within the Horde, bearing children for a Mongol officer. Her former world faded into memory, replaced by a new identity imposed by conquest. The genius of the system lay in absorption, turning enemies into kin, erasing borders through blood. The pattern is uncomfortably familiar. Even today, empires reshape societies through forced movement and assimilation, often under banners of necessity or security. The cost is always personal. From Samarkand's ruins, the Mongol armies split apart like fragments of a shattered blade. Genghis Khan sent his sons Jochi and Chagatai north toward Urgench, the heart of the Khwarezmian realm. What followed shifted the narrative from calculated conquest to something far darker. A merchant from Bukhara, who fled ahead of the Horde, later recorded the siege of Urgench in trembling script. The city stood on the Amu Darya River and resisted for months. In response, the Mongols dammed the river, flooding neighborhoods until walls collapsed. When the breach came, there was no restraint. Streets ran red, pyramids of skulls were stacked as high as houses. The merchant hid in a cellar, listening to neighbors dragged screaming into the streets. Women were herded like animals. Many were never seen again. This was not the swift, organized fall of Samarkand. This was grinding extermination. Even children were slaughtered in the frenzy. Some historians claim as many as 1.2 million died, though numbers vary wildly and were often exaggerated by chroniclers. But the intent was undeniable. The system rewarded excess. Plunder motivated the soldiers. Terror ensured future submission. And yet, in his account, the merchant noted a strange, haunting detail. Amid the smoke and ruin, a Mongol warrior paused to admire a captured peacock, its feathers shimmering with color. For a fleeting moment, beauty pierced the brutality, a reminder that even inside the machinery, humanity flickered. Then the killing resumed. Reports traveled rapidly through the Mongol YAM system, relay stations that carried messages across continents with astonishing speed. Commanders like Subutai, brilliant and ruthless, executed orders with precision. Promotion followed success. Failure meant disappearance. The violence spread south to Merv and Nishapur. In Nishapur, resistance cost the city everything. After a Mongol prince was killed, the order came down for total annihilation. Survivors were forced to count severed heads to prove no one remained alive. Entire regions emptied. Fields lay abandoned. The land itself seemed to recoil. The Bukhara merchant eventually escaped, disguised as a beggar, carrying his testimony with him. His words became warnings whispered in courts and marketplaces. This was the system's reach. Not just armies, but a web of fear unraveling societies from within. By late 1220, Samarkand lay subdued, but the war was not finished. Jalal ad-Din, the Shah's son, gathered remaining forces in the south and struck Mongol outposts with desperate courage. For the first time, the machine encountered meaningful resistance. Genghis Khan pursued him relentlessly across rivers, deserts, and mountains. The final confrontation came on the banks of the Indus River. Jalal's army was outnumbered, but fought with ferocity born of extinction. Arrows darkened the sky. Steel rang against steel. The roar of the river swallowed screams as men clashed in mud and blood. Genghis Khan watched from a hill, receiving constant reports from scouts, adjusting formations with cold precision. Jalal ad-Din charged again and again, breaking Mongol lines through sheer force of will. But each time, they reformed, disciplined, unyielding. One by one, Jalal's men fell, cut down, trampled, swept into the river's current. The air stank of iron and wet earth. Time itself seemed to slow. In the end, Jalal spurred his horse straight into the river, leaping from the bank and vanishing into the chaos of water and foam. He escaped into India. Genghis Khan watched in silence, then spoke words that carried unexpected respect. A father should have a son like this. But the field behind him told the real story. Thousands lay dead. The river carried bodies downstream. This was not horror in detail, but in scale. An empire lay shattered. Its people were dead, scattered, or absorbed. And here, at last, a fracture appeared. The pursuit had stretched Mongol lines thin. Overreach had exposed vulnerability. Genghis Khan called off the chase and turned back. The system bent, but it did not break. Even as the Mongol armies withdrew, the damage they left behind continued to spread. Cities smoldered, trade routes collapsed. Survivors crawled back into the ruins, rebuilding quietly, cautiously,